and member for Micoud South, who is Honorable Alan Chasney, who is to my right. And then to my left, I've got the MP for the constituency of Choiseul Saltibus, and that is the Honorable Bradley Felix. We are here today to reinforce and to reemphasize the importance of defending our democracy. We are here today for nothing else but to ensure that we safeguard the democratic principles of our country. We believe that as the main opposition in the country, we have a fundamental obligation to ensure that St. Lucia does not become a totalitarian regime, but it remains steadfastly and firmly as a country that is going to embrace democratic principles. Why do we believe so? Because the evidence is clear that when we look around the world and we see countries that have embraced democratic principles, those countries have been the ones that have created a good lifestyle for their citizens, a good quality of life, good health care, clean drinking water, good paying jobs, leading innovativeness, allowing the spirit of entrepreneurship to thrive. And so a lot is at stake. This is not just some political squabble between the two main parties. This is an important initiative. This is an important statement that we are here to make today. And this is an important era in our country. Since the outcome of the last general elections, we have seen attempts made by the Labour Party that have swept the polls 15-2 to silence the voice of the opposition. Clearly, St. Lucians have become too familiar with their very scathing attempts to silence the leader of the opposition, the MP for Choiseul. In fact, the Labour Party, in my view, have been very distracted from dealing with the crucial matters facing our country at this time. Ensuring that we address the untenably high unemployment rate, ensuring that we address the issues of cost of living gripping our country, issues of gas prices that are high, issues of bus fares that have risen, the price of bread that have gone up, the price of gas at the pumps, and all the important matters that are really critical and crucial to you, the people of St. Lucia. Instead, they've been having baked Alan Chasney and fried Bradley Felix for lunch. And so, in its quest to demoralize, disrespect, and to silence the opposition, the Labour Party has made several hasty steps. Just recently, a court has had to rule that the efforts by the Speaker and indeed the House of Assembly to hold the leader of the opposition before a privileges committee, and I quote the court order, which says that those efforts were unconstitutional and they were null and void. And so therefore they had no hold, no legal position in the House of Assembly. That was just a few short months ago. We are now back in the same place where a House unprecedentedly decided that they were going to vote to suspend a duly constitutionally elected member from entering the premises of the House of Assembly. And it is only after that MP would have gone to defend his rights in the courts that the government is now pretending as if they are willing to negotiate. And so what has happened recently in the courts is a big indictment on the Labour Party, where they are now suggesting that in an affidavit submitted by the leader of government business that the House intended at its next sitting to reverse its decision that it's so confidently made, that it's so nonchalantly made, that it had an overwhelming unanimous support unwaveringly from all 15 MPs, that it was within its right to suspend the member for Micoud South. What has made the member for Castries South so generous? What is the change of heart? Could it be that upon legal reflection, that the Labour Party, as it did a few months ago, when it attempted to withdraw the privileges matter, now realize that they have erred, now realize that in their haste to silence Bradley Felix and Alan Chasney, that they have made a fundamental error, that they have undermined our democracy, that they have made a laughing stock of our parliament, that they have abused the privileges afforded to them by the people of St. Lucia. And so we see that our parliament, which is one of the pillars, the supreme legislative and decision-making body of our country, is now under a reputational threat, where the Speaker, who is supposed to safeguard the sacredness, who is supposed to safeguard the constitutional requirements of the Parliament, has now found himself in a bind once more. It was unfortunate to hear the Speaker on his talk show saying that he was disgusted by Labour Party supporters who were calling him to ask whether the Labour Party had lost the court case or not, of which I will not say a lot about, because I do not want to prejudice the ongoing matter. But what I will say is that, Speaker Francis, it is extremely unfortunate that you have not been able to express the level of confidence that we should all have in you to be a fair, unbiased, and impartial speaker as it relates to matters pertaining to the House of Assembly. You have clearly shown that you lack the capacity to divorce yourself from your long-standing relationship with the St. Lucia Labour Party and your obligation to ensure that you demonstrate professionalism, class, and decorum in the House of Assembly. This is disgusting. I've had people who have called me from around the Caribbean and who have said, what is happening in St. Lucia? Why can't you all get it right? Why is the politics so prevalent? And so today and in the coming weeks, as the main opposition, we will continue to fight for democracy. We will continue to ensure that democracy is safeguarded so that many generations to come would have looked back at our efforts in this juncture of our history and will be able to say, we are happy that the politicians, that the people within the United Workers' Party of that generation did not allow our democracy to go down the tubes. I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to this issue this morning. I want to bring on my colleague MP from Choiseul, the Honorable Bradley Felix, as our next speaker, to be followed by opening statements from the Leader of the Opposition and member for Micoud South, following which we will accept any questions that you may have about this matter. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press. Good morning, St. Lucia. Senator Dominic Fedee used an analogy in his opening statements to indicate that the opposition were baking and frying the leader of the opposition and the MP for Choiseul Saltibus. What he forgot to mention was that we are too hot to swallow, too hot to handle. Ladies and gentlemen, as the only other member in Parliament with the Leader of the Opposition, it is our duty to represent not just the 30-odd thousand people who voted for us, but the similar number who did not vote, and also the people who are currently disenchanted with what is happening with our country. We must have a voice. We must speak on the issues that the people don't get an opportunity to speak about, and they don't have the opening to discuss to the members of cabinet as to what's affecting them. I stand with the Leader of the Opposition in solidarity that he should not ever in St. Lucia history be thrown out of the Parliament, which is the house where we are able to express ourselves and support the people of St. Lucia and let their voices be heard. We must never allow our democracy to be run down the drain. We must always remember what we stand for as a people. Whether you like a particular party, whether you support the party in government, let us not forget the fundamental issue here. And the fundamental issue is that the right, the freedom of speech is trying to be suffocated, is trying to be stifled. And we must never as a country allow that. Regardless of your preferences and biases, let us take out the blinkers and let us look at that thing for what it is. That the Leader of the Opposition is trying to be suppressed in speaking out on the issues that matter to the people of St. Lucia. This is my contribution today, and I respectfully ask all St. Lucians to look at what has happened in the past few months through the eyes of neutrality and for what it's worth. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, I recently filed an urgent application to the court to restrain the Speaker of the House, Mr. Claudius Francis, from excluding me as a Leader of the Opposition and a member of the House from sitting in the House when it next convenes. We all saw and have seen what transpired in the House during the budget debate. I think that my court application speaks to many breaches in procedure and in my constitutional rights. There are those persons who continuously try to say that the court has no place in Parliament. And I think that that's a general rule. But Parliament came out of the Constitution of our country. Our Constitution creates Parliament. Our Constitution is what empowers Parliament. So it means that Parliament cannot act in contravention of that same Constitution. So while the Constitution gives the Parliament the right to create its own rules, it's not like if it's in an island by itself and it has its own rules that are separate and apart from the Constitution of this country. So things like freedom of movement, freedom of speech. In fact, the Constitution goes to the extent to say that the speech that we have in the House is protected. The reason why it's protected is for members of the opposition in particular to be able to feel free to say and ask any questions. It is our job to hold the government accountable. And it's for the government to provide the information that contradicts or undermines or proves our statements otherwise. So what took place in the House was both in breach of the parliamentary rules, our standing orders, as well as my rights as a MP in the House. The first question that was brought when Richard Fedrick rushed back into the House to put on his mic to raise a point of order. It is questionable whether in fact he can do that. Meaning, I had already completed my presentation. He was not in the House when any of my statements were being made. So that's the first question that's being put to the court. The second question is, he stood on a point of that I was misleading the House. And specifically, he was making reference to the valuation that was done in 2013. It's questionable whether in the standing order that he rose on, that he could have raised that issue. The next one is the decision of the Speaker to broaden the standing order, of the point of order. What do I mean by that? The point of order that Mr. Fedrick brought up was to deal with the evaluation of the land. Had nothing to do with the statement about corruption. At no point did he raise that as a point of order, or did anybody else. If you remember, the Speaker's last words to me during my presentation was, "Member, you have 30 seconds to wrap up." No point did anybody stand up and make any allegation, and nor should they have, because both the acting Governor General and the Prime Minister in their earlier speeches spoke to corruption. But the fact is, nobody did. Not one person stood on a point of order on that statement. So for the Speaker to have turned around at that point and to ask me to create a nexus between the evaluation and corruption was misplaced. And then now, for the Speaker to ask me to retract the statement. So what I was asked to do was to retract the statement and to apologize. How can I retract a statement that is accurate? Despite Richard Fedrick's attempt to convince both the House and the general public that Parcel 11 and Parcel 50 are two different pieces of land. That's his argument. Because he said Parcel 11 was mutated and became Parcel 50 and 51. And he showed that 50 was 1 hectare and 51 was 0.17 of a hectare. And he says that Parcel 11 does not exist today. Well, guess what? Parcel 50 didn't exist 9 years ago. The reason why Parcel 50 and Parcel 11 cannot coexist, meaning you cannot have both Parcel 11 and Parcel 50, is because they are one in the same. The valuation that was done in 2013 was for 1 hectare, 2.4 acres of land located in Banans. When the mutation was done, the reason why the mutation was done was to create 51. 51 is 0.17 of a hectare because it includes land from Parcel 10 and 9. So it was a strip of land that was taken away from the 3 parcels to put a footpath. And when you look at the map, you'll see that more land was taken away from 9 and 10 than was taken away from 11. But the fundamental and material information is that Parcel 11, when it was evaluated at 1 hectare. Parcel 50 is 1 hectare, and what was sold was 1 hectare. So how can I retract that statement? How can I retract the statement that there was an evaluation done in 2013 of $6.7 million? That's a fact. And it's the same piece of land. How could I retract that there was a valuation done in 2021 in which the land was valued at $3.5 million? That's a fact. How do I retract the fact that the land was sold for $2.7 million? That's a fact. We know that. How do I retract that there was no bid put out? It's a fact. It was not put out to tender. Those are all facts. And for me to make the allegation or suggestion that this was a corrupt process is what I'm entitled to say and assume as leader of the opposition or an MP, an opposition in the House. It's for the government to show that the process was not corrupt. But this attempt to try to show that Parcel 11 and Parcel 50 are 2 different pieces of land is an out-and-out lie and intended to deceive the people of this country. And all of the evidence is there to support what I've said. So upon my filing, we were supposed to have had the case on Friday. And unfortunately, the lead lawyer for the government, for the defendants, was not available. And the case was put off until Monday. And when we arrived at the hearing on Monday, the defendants provided a new affidavit in which they said they now recognize the rights of the people of Micoud South. And because of that, that they were going to rescind, revoke my suspension. I want to say that this was the same thing that we saw during the Privileges Committee. If you remember, I had written a letter to the Speaker of the House indicating that there were breaches in the process. I gave him an opportunity to rectify it. He doubled down on it. And I think that once he received legal advice by the Monday, he recognized that they were wrong and decided that they were no longer going to have the Privileges meeting. But there was too much water on the bridge then, and there was too much water on the bridge now. And so we argued with the court that whatever decision was being made, it had to be an undertaking to us, sanctioned by the court. What's the significance of that? Is the undertaking which I will read to you, if they are in any way in breach of it, it's contempt of court. So it's an undertaking they give to me, but it's endorsed and sanctioned in front of the court. So it becomes a court order at that point. We call it a consenting court order. But it has the enforcement of the court. I want to be very clear that the undertaking does not require me to apologize. The undertaking does not require me to withdraw the statement. So I am giving back my full authority and ability to present myself in front of the House. That should never have been taken away. Correct. Should never have been taken away. But the substantive issues that I've mentioned, whether the point of order, the point of order that Richard Fedrick raised, whether that was permissible. The second one is to how the Speaker found himself including things that were never put in the point of order. And the application of 43.6 and 43.3 in the standing orders to suspend me indefinitely. And very importantly, why was I restrained from leaving the House? And in fact, is that false imprisonment? Okay? Those matters are still on the cards. And part of the agreement, the undertaking, is that we've all agreed to proceed with the court case. July 27th will be case management, and hopefully the case will be heard in early September, because it's an urgent matter that needs to be determined. So the undertaking that was given by the defendants was, one, to invite the claimant, me, Alan Chastney, to attend the next sitting of the House, whenever that should occur. So remember, what I was told is I was not allowed to come by the premise. They have now agreed that I can come to the next House sitting. Two, not to exclude or cause to be excluded the claimant, Alan Chastney, from entering the House or the precincts of the House. Three, to allow the claimant, Alan Chastney, to take his seat in the House, but not participate in proceedings pending the vote on the motion to lift the suspension of the claimant. So it means when I come to the House, I'll be sitting in the Leader of the Opposition's seat. We'll go through the normal procedures, and that the motion to lift the suspension of the claimant shall be the first matter to be dealt with the House at the next sitting of the House, whenever that should occur. So because the House put the sanction on me, the House has to lift the sanction. So I'll be sitting in the House when that sanction is put to vote and hopefully passed. Upon the motion being carried, the claimant, Alan Chastney, will be at liberty to carry on his duties in service of the House. Okay? And again, I want to say that this undertaking is a consent order, and if there's any breach in this consent order, it would be contempt of court. So they've given not only me, but they've also given the courts the undertaking that they would do that. This was not done out of benevolence. And it's difficult for me to believe at this point that a government that was elected on putting the people first, that's their mantra, that it took them almost a week to realize that they were taking away the rights of the people from Micoud South. Okay? I don't believe that for 1 minute. I'm willing to accept it, but I don't believe it. Because that's a fact that existed when they did this in the first place. They should have known better. And they didn't. I more believe that they have done this because they have realized and now are starting to understand the magnitude of the mistake they've made in the breach of our Constitution and the interpretation of their own standing orders, which is no different than what took place during the Privileges Committee. So for those persons who continuously put notes out suggesting that the court will not intercede in a parliamentary matter, we've proven that not to be the case from the time of the Privileges Committee case. And we will prove it once again. And again, I think it's very important that I reiterate what Dominic and also what Bradley said. This is not a victory for me. It's a victory for the people. It's a victory for our Constitution. It's a victory for democracy in this country. This is a victory for being able to hold any government accountable. I'm going to say something that I'm sure everybody has already come to the realization. That this government is behaving as if a 15-2 majority in the parliament gives them the right to be dictators, to do whatever they want to do. As I said, where many solutions may not want to appreciate what we said at the time, hopefully they can go back and reflect on some of the things. The decision to stop the state of the emergency, but yet continue to impose a curfew in this country, is a significant breach in the Constitution of St. Lucia. The Constitution of St. Lucia is very clear. If you are going to take away inalienable rights, the right of speech, the right of freedom of movement, it must be done in a state of emergency. Because the state of emergency sets out guidelines on how the government must remain accountable to the people whose rights they're taking away. So for the Attorney General's office to have advised the government that they could have continued to impose a curfew without a state of emergency is categorically wrong and dangerous to our democracy. The interference of the state on several cases, the cases of persons who were found wanting during COVID, the Christopher Hunt case, the Ernest Hilaire Range Rover case. These are all breaches in our Constitution and our democracy. And most recently, the Suppression Act. Bradley and I argued, take your time. Again, you are imposing powers, authority to individuals that you cannot do. Cannot give an ordinary police officer the right to enter your house without a warrant, to pull you off on the side of the street without a warrant, to detain you in your own home for more than 72 hours without a warrant. If you want to do those things, you have to do them in a state of emergency. And the difference would be is that there would have to be an administrative process to account for every single time that a person's rights were taken away from them. I'm taking my time to explain this because these are important things. And what transpired in the House has occurred because we as a people have not stood up and held our ground to protect our democracy and our Constitution. And our voices in the House was not for ourselves. What were we protecting? We're protecting the policies that are hurting the people of this country. We saw inflation coming. We had a chance to do things to intervene. We didn't just criticize, we provided a 6-point plan. And many of those things in those plans were adopted by other countries successfully. How you can have a government that would allow the price of bread to go up? How would you have a government that would allow price of bus fares to go up? To cause people to be paying $17 or $17.95 for a gallon of gas. To have allowed cooking gas to go from $22 a cylinder to $44 a cylinder. All the while crying and indicating the sacrifices that they made. And then when the budget came, that's what they're scared of, is that we were able to highlight that the government actually collected more revenue than they were supposed to have. And yet they did nothing to subsidize and lessen the burden to the people of this country who are reeling under this pressure. A government that came in and criticized the policies of United Workers' Party. Yet we saw 12.5% growth, 18.5% growth, and we're only left to wonder if in fact the policies were allowed to remain. If in fact we had built the airport, if we had completed St. Jude's, if we had completed the road projects and allowed the housing projects to go, if we had continued the work to rebuild the Castries, the introduction of a healthcare insurance program, the introduction of a national social welfare program to help the more vulnerable people in this society. Where would we be today? Where? And it's that voice that is there not to champion ourselves, but to champion the more vulnerable people in our society. And this is a victory for our democracy, a victory for our Constitution. And hopefully it is a turning point in this country that we start recognizing that this government are clueless. They have no idea how to govern this country. And the idea that they care about anybody is a charade. They only care about themselves. And it is a joke to even think that they mean transparency and accountability. Because what is transpiring at the Banans land, what is transpiring at the building of the new housing building on the chaussee, and there's more to be said on that. The attempt to say to people about Cabot and DSH and to try to compare them to the Banans land. Cabot was private land. Government never owned it. NIC lent them money. That's what NIC does. And I'm glad that information has come out. So the NIC made a loan of $10 million US, $30 million, $27 million EC. And the land was valued at $90 million. So it means that they were holding an asset worth $90 million for a loan of $30 million. And because of their overzealousness to want to be in government, NIC and the developer agreed to terminate the loan earlier. Whereas NIC could be making more money on that project now. The DSH project, they have the agreement. Just over 200 acres of land was leased to the developer in exchange for the developer to build a $30 million US horse racing track, which he did with his own money. We need to continue to put pressure on this government to answer. And here's the sad part, is that what transpired in the House was an attempt to silence the opposition and the questions we were asking about the Banans land. And those parliamentarians sat there and listened to information that was clearly wrong, and they knew it was wrong, and covered up. And it was easier in their minds to silence the opposition as a solution than to hold the Minister and Housing Department accountable for what has transpired there today. So again, I want to reiterate very strongly, this was a victory for the people. This is a victory for the voice of the opposition. This is a victory for democracy. And this is a victory, as Bradley and Dominic put out, that our continual pursuit to hold this government accountable on the policies that they have, particularly as they pertain to the cost of living in this country, particularly as they pertain to generating jobs in this country, and doing the things that benefit all of us. We have a lot more to say on what we think the next coming weeks as far as the economy go. The tourism industry is on a decline. This last week we saw the least amount of arrivals at HIA than any other week of this year. My understanding is that the advanced bookings are so weak that there are several hotels that are actually going to be putting staff on rotation. So the situation is actually going to decline more than strengthen. And we intend to make sure that our voice can be heard. And when I stood up in the House and said, I will not be silenced, it is not from my voice alone, but it's the impact of my voice. And as Bradley said, that voice represents over 37,000 people who voted for United Workers' Party. Another 40,000 people who did not vote in this country. And the many more people today who have now seen and through this government and realized that we all made a mistake. That this government does not have the capacity, does not have the care and the conscience to help the people of this country, and the time is growing nigh for this government. So at that point, I stop and I open up the floor for any questions the media may have.
I have a few questions. Going back to Claudius, I know in the past, the call from the EWP has been quite resign, but based on his stance, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. and in the past he has denied victimization, saying that there are situations where he has ruled in your favor or in your opposition's favor, etc. I recently spoke to Anthony Adlaw, who rose another point in terms of this whole objectivity, is that the fact that he has a political talk show as the speaker, and the argument was that it kind of muddies the water, and then he should refrain from being on that talk show, or he should stop his talk show. How do you opine on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Just repeat the gist of the question so that the Facebook audience can hear
Okay.
the context.
So the question was the issue of whether Claudius, the speaker, should have to resign, and the conflict that is being perceived based on him having his own show and his political talk show. So do we believe? We believed long ago that Claudius, the speaker, needed to resign. He's lost all credibility. The fact is that in order for him to resign, either he has to have it within himself and recognize what he's representing. I'm not so sure that he's shown that capacity to put the country above himself. Because I think if he put the country above himself, he'd recognize he's doing more harm to the country than good. And sometimes you have to recluse yourself from that situation. The only entity that can cause the speaker to be removed, if he doesn't want to be removed by himself, is Parliament. And we've seen that every single time that this Parliament, they have chosen to vote in favor down party lines rather than any level of objectivity. It is clear for all of us to see that the current speaker has been an embarrassment to the Parliament of St. Lucia. In fact, when he lost the first case and cost the country over $150,000, he should have resigned then. I would like to think that right after the motion is passed to bring me back in the House, that he would then do the right thing and resign, or at least announce that he's resigning, until a new speaker can be appointed. I have no expectation that the current crop of MPs on the government side could ever show any level of objectivity or put the country first. Because if they were putting the country first, they would ask him to leave. His bazooka statements, even his statement yesterday or 2 days ago, that it was the worst 6.5 hours of his life. And what was the reason? Because people were believing an untruth? What's the untruth? That he won the case? That we were to believe that there was benevolence and all of a sudden there was a recognition about the rights of the people from Micoud South? Come on. Come on. That's not true. Again, he was compelled by the court to compromise. And a position that, again, he's not representing Claudius Francis, he's representing the Parliament of St. Lucia. You know, there's one of the cases that we cited of an MP that was suspended for 2 weeks in St. Kitts. And the court ended up ruling in favor of the MP and said the reason why an MP goes to Parliament is to speak. Parliament comes from the word parler. The Constitution gives the right to the Parliament to create rules for behavior, but it specifically says that members are free to speak. Now, there's a word that's going around, and I want us to really understand the meaning of that word called the chilling effect. A chilling effect is when there is a policy to intimidate and threaten people to compromise their positions. So when you see them behaving the way that they do towards me as a leader of government business, what does that say to Bradley? You're allowed to speak, but be careful what you say. No. The Constitution protects that Bradley and myself to say whatever we want to say. St. Lucia, this thing where the NTN show video was taken down and edited is a significant breach in the trust that we should have in this government. That public information can be manipulated, and that a minister, a member of parliament would stand up and say it's done because they're scared that they're going to be sued. In all the years that NTN has gone, why would it be live and put up? Because we recognize it's protected. That's nonsense. And we need to get angry. Honestly, not violence, angry. Because this is our Constitution. These are our laws. And if we allow them to be breached in this manner, then who's next? I keep on saying, if you believe that they can do this to me, I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I have the resources to take this government to court. How many people in this country are not in that position? Who'd only have $2 to rub together and feel that their rights are being breached, but they're scared to say anything because their rights will be breached even further. That's what is at stake. And I'm glad and I'm appreciative that I've been given the opportunity to be in a position to challenge this government on these issues. But I cry. My heart's broken when I think of people who are having to compromise their own speech, compromise their own ideas, because if they don't, they're going to be victimized in this country. And I say to the media the same thing. Cannot be scared of victimization. And there's a difference between being challenged and victimization. When a government will not put advertising money into radio stations or TV stations or newspapers because they don't believe that they are saying what they want them to say, all of us collectively must stand out and say no. It's when we have our common voice that we'll be able to do that. And that's what I want to say. I'm expecting that Parliament is going to be on Tuesday. And I've made the decision to walk from here to Parliament on Tuesday. And all those persons who truly recognize the victory was theirs, I'm asking them to join me. And we walk, not protest, but we walk in celebration of what we've accomplished recently. But I need to know, we all need to know that these are also important things for the people. It's going to take the people's voice to answer your question, to cause Claudius Francis to resign. He is not going to do it. He has shown that he's not going to put country above self. The parliamentarians whose vote you would need to fire him are not, because they've shown that they're going to put party above country. And so it is for the people of this country, the people's parliament, to show him that he needs to go. And if we don't, he won't.
Just shifting gears a little bit, I know you spoke about people, like you spoke about the economy earlier. We just recently had the staging of jazz, and by all indications, organizers, government is touting the successes in their words. Just based on your observations, I know we're in the absence of a postmortem, so we don't have anything concrete. But just based on your analysis of what went on, what's your evaluation on the St. Lucia Jazz?
So first of all, the person who started St. Lucia Jazz was Alan Chastity, okay, back in 1992. The purpose of jazz was to create an event to attract people to St. Lucia in what was considered to be, May, June, and September and October were our lowest months, right? And when we first did jazz included BET. So it was on TV. And then we grew it to other TV networks around the world. We also understood that when we did jazz, that in order for it to be successful as a tourism tool, you had to announce the lineup almost literally, or the dates, literally a year in advance. because the British and the Americans would need that kind of time to make their bookings and for the proper promotion. So you would get the pre-promotion and then you would get the post-promotion of the event. When we decided to change the format of jazz, so we took elements of the Jazz and Arts Festival and decided instead of having them all on 1 week, because it gotten to the point where the hotel rooms were being filled up with production people, with the artists and all the producers. And so the economic impact was being lost, and we were no longer on TV. Right? So the idea was to go to a pure jazz festival, because we believed that we could be the best pure jazz festival in the Caribbean. And one of the best in the world, because that's what we were being ranked at initially when we first launched. If you all remember, one of the best jazz festivals in the world. Okay? We then took the roots part of the festival and put it on a different week, and to create a summer festival so that we could now stretch it out and we wouldn't have to spend as much money on production cost. So I would say to you that looking at this jazz festival, I question, well, let me first say, I'm very happy that coming out of COVID and many people who had not had the opportunity to travel, this was one of the first big events that we've had since COVID. So for the people, I'm very happy. I love to see people enjoying themselves and entertaining themselves. What I would question is the amount of money that was spent on Jazz Festival this year, which seems to be in excess of $12 million. We know that the government put $8 million in, and the remaining amount would have come. That the late announcement of Jazz was only announced in February, and therefore that's why we didn't see any arrivals at HIA. It was too late in the game for the British and the Americans and the Canadians to meaningfully participate in the Jazz Festival. And you would have seen for yourself, most of the people who came internationally really came from Martinique, maybe Dominica, and St. Vincent, because we don't even have interregional travel. We have noticed, Dominic and myself, that in the last 18 months that the government's policies towards tourism are very weak and are not being effective. The idea of going back to sales shows to travel agencies, they're going to travel agencies is important, but it can't be the cornerstone of what you're doing from a marketing perspective. The government seemed to have taken for granted the amount of airlift that we had organized to come into St. Lucia. And we kept on saying, you need to stay focused on the airlift, you need to stay focused on the airlift. Now the minister is coming out to recognize that airfares to St. Lucia have more than doubled since 6 months ago. And that's having a chilling effect on arrivals into St. Lucia. And there's no counter. And I'm very concerned at this point that there's going to be an overreaction to trying to save the summer. There's no way of saving the summer. And resources that would have been needed to market the destination for this winter have been now used up in the Jazz Festival. Because one of the things that we did in separating the Jazz Festival from the Tourism Authority and putting an events company was the cash flow impact it was having on marketing. And we felt that these were two very separate elements that were required. So I'm very happy for the people. I'm glad to see people enjoy themselves. I always welcome whenever we do events and we put them out throughout the length and breadth of St. Lucia. I'm not so sure that jazz really was the music form to do that. I think that that's what Carnival does. I think that's what the Creole Heritage Festival does. And you know, they have laid down a stake in the ground to suggest that jazz not only was an event to help the local economy, but was also going to help tourism. In time, we'll see whether that's the case or not. But I don't want to take away in any way from the people who enjoyed it, the local artists that got to participate. I always love to see their exposure. I was hoping that there would have been more TV coverage, more international coverage and exposure. I'm not really getting a sense that that was really put in play. So that would be our comments on it.
And I just have one question for
Question. Back to the Claudius Francis issue. What is it the party doing in order to possibly see that Claudius Francis resign as the Speaker of the House.
Repeat the gist of the
Yeah.
question again.
So the question is, what is it the opposition is doing to try to make sure that Claudius Francis resigns from the House? As I said, all we can do is to continue to say to the public of St. Lucia that Parliament is our institution. It represents us. It's the image of who we are in St. Lucia, and it carries a tremendous amount of merit locally, but even more so internationally. That it is very clear that Claudius Francis does not have the moral character to do the right thing. He sees himself, I can tell you personally, Claudius Francis, much bigger than the position of the Speaker. And because of that, I do not believe that he will do the right thing and resign. He ought to. I would always like to be surprised, but I genuinely don't believe in the behavior that I've seen and the fact that he's trying to defend his actions, even though it's clear that he was wrong, that he's going to do that. Secondly, I do not see the parliamentarians moving away from support of party first and not country. Okay? So those are the two people. So I'm just saying to you, if we want to see him move, the opposition only has 2 votes in the House. We cannot do it by ourselves. We need for people to write in. I would like to see people show up and walk with me. There has to be a very visible rejection and demand by the public towards it. So calling in talk shows, writing in letters, those kinds of things. And if we stage the Speaker must move from the House movement, that it's the people who are going to have to cause him to leave, because the other mechanisms I don't believe are going to work.
All right, being from Micoud South, I'm not scared of saying where I'm from. There's rumors, that's what I heard, and do you think that whatever that they're doing to you, they suspend you, they are suspending you from the House, is it that is leading to a by-election? Because I know the one that's back. The one that Micoud South seat. So do you think that's why they're doing all what they're doing to you? That they're trying to run a by-election in Micoud South?
Look, we saw that from the beginning. When I didn't appear for the first,
Repeat the gist of
the question is whether the actions of the current government are a deliberate attempt to try to create a by-election in Micoud South, specifically because they want that seat. Look, I think that we've seen the actions from the get-go. When I came in and I missed 2 sittings of the House, they tried to withhold my pay, and all of a sudden, when I sent notices into the Speaker that I wasn't going to be there, he said they were insufficient. And clearly the whole idea that if I'd missed 6 meetings, that I would have to have a by-election. So that talk has been there from the beginning. You know, I've been in the House, Bradley's there, so he can confirm what I'm going to say. There are many times I sit in the House and there are members on the other side say to me, "What are you doing here? You don't look like any one of us. Why are you here? And you need to go." Right? So there's every single attempt to exclude me from the House. The Privileges Committee was to do what? To try to embarrass me and to try to cause me to be removed from my position as an MP from Micoud South. And then obviously this latest one, when you're going to suspend me indefinitely, clearly that you would have exposed me to one of the things that the Constitution says you can be removed for. That if you miss 6 consecutive meetings without an excuse, you have been deemed to have vacated the seat, and therefore there would be a by-election. But I'm so grateful to the people of Micoud South who call me, send me messages, and give me the support and the fortitude to know that I can concentrate on doing what I am in the House. And I know that many of them recognize that I'm working very hard every day. I mean, I don't have a day off. And we continue to do some work in the constituency. We're fixing up the Beauchamp changing rooms. We're adding a new bathroom and changing room facility in Lacouville. We're fixing up the community center in Douga. We just did a road in Leslie. I was grateful that the government potholed T. Rocher Road. Not exactly what I wanted, but it's better than what it was before. But we put a lot of infrastructure in place. I'm proud of the fact that we have 3 community centers in the constituency. One in T. Rocher, one in Deriso, and the new one that's being built in Blasha. I'm proud of the fact that we did the playing field in Deriso, and to see the amount of sporting activities, particularly football, that's taking place, and the lights that we have. The water park that we put in Blasha, the roads that we've done, adding water generally to the constituency. And I want to let my constituents know that the moment that we get back into government, that work is going to continue to make sure that Mikudians are proud about coming to Miku South. And by putting the infrastructure in, indirectly what you're doing is raising the price of land. That means that people benefit from it. I'm very heartbroken and disappointed that the people from Angers, after we did all those subdivisions, we put everything in place to rationalize the land there so that persons could own their own piece of land, that has been stopped because clearly it's not continued. But again, the persons in Duga, where they were evicted from a piece of land, and all the promises by everybody, here you are a year and a half later, nothing has happened. And I'm hoping that even the people from Miku North now, after putting the Labour Party in office, have recognized nothing has come their way. This is the same government that, if you remember when they were fixing up the East Coast Road, stopped the road at Canals and restarted the road in Pralaino. Nothing has changed. Don't expect them to do anything in those seats. And that's the problem. The Labour Party continues to think of St. Lucia on a constituency by constituency basis. United Workers' Party has a plan. When people tell me that they didn't elect us in Vieux Fort, every other word out of my mouth was the South. Was the South. Look at what's going on. I honestly, it hurts me to think where we would be if, in fact, United Workers' Party had won the elections. The airport would be open. I mean, I arrived at the airport yesterday. It's a disaster. St. Jude's would be open in a world-class facility. And the same Cayman Health City people that they want to continue to criticize are building a 100-room facility now in Barbados. So that means that the services that they were going to provide, international services, that would have been available to St. Lucians in St. Lucia, we are now going to have to travel to Barbados to go and get those services. You don't need to be an economist or a land developer to know it made sense to put the cruise ship terminal in Vieux Fort. Even people in Castries can see that. You're going to go now and expand the facilities in Castries to create even more congestion? We started the West Coast Road. Who does not pass the Millennium Highway and shake their head and say, what a disaster? But the victory that we had is to continue to allow us to put the pressure on that the Labour Party doesn't want. That's why they're attempting to silence us in the House. Of the pressure that we're putting on and the questions that we're continuously asking. And it's two people. Two people. At the last sitting of the House, it is convention that the leader of the opposition is given the same amount of time to speak as the Prime Minister. It's convention. They said they're not going to give it to me unless I speak when they want me to speak. They don't have the right to tell me when I get to speak in the House. That's my privilege. And so they gave me only 15 more minutes. Everybody could see it for themselves. Previously, they didn't even let me speak. They're not hurting me. Alan Chastanet, as a person, I can take that. I grew up working in my father's ships. I played basketball for almost 7 years in the Gardens. I'm a man, I get it. I know the games. But the people I feel for is the people of this country, because what is happening is that their rights are the ones that are being undermined. they're the ones who are going to lose at the end of the day. And we have every right to question what this government is doing. Any other questions?
Well, I had one question.
I
Final
have a
question.
youngster right here. I want to give him a chance. Yeah. So, sorry. Don't kill the young fella. Amir.
The Speaker of the House on his talk show said that when he questioned your rationale for taking him to court, because he said that it was Parliament who sanctioned you and not him. What is your response here?
The judge,
The gist of the question.
yeah, the gist of the question is that the Speaker of the House questioned why I took him to court, because Parliament was the one that instituted the sanctions. The judge answered that, right? You know, the judge said, "Look, it's your house. You're in charge of the house." If you remember, and you go through the process, when it came up, the Speaker advised the government, the other parliamentarians, on what to do. Yeah, he said that he didn't have the authority to sanction me past one sitting, and if they wanted to sanction me heavier, that they're the ones who have that authority. So this is all a charade. Yeah, this is just an attempt to deflect, right, what the truth is. And that's why when people ask, you know, what was the result of the case, there's a very simple answer. I am back into the House. I've not had to apologize or retract any statement. And that the material issues, substantive issues, will be continued in court for the court to make a determination, and also to determine how I'm compensated. How do you think I should be compensated for the fact that on national TV I was arrested?
The journalist from Chuzal.
Did you see any behavior? Did you see anything in my behavior that warranted me to be sanctioned? Right? Now, if in fact we're going to be as parliamentarians sanctioned by what we speak, then we're in serious trouble.
We once again see some controversy brewing around the lands by the Petons down in Chuzal, and some residents and constituents have expressed their concern about those developments there. What's I guess your stance, or if you have anything to add to that?
The question is, there's a video that's going around with regards to the lands at near Fongelib in is it Anse-Louvois? Anse-Louvois. And what is our opinion on it? So I'm going to take you back in a little time in So where there were existing developments, those things were kind of exempted, but exempted by way of not being included in the PMA. But there were many St. Lucian families who own land in the PMA. And what was supposed to have happened was that the state, the government of St. Lucia, was to acquire those lands and compensate them for those lands. That would be the fair thing. But that was going to cost millions and millions of dollars, and it never happened. So the land that is in question right now was land that was owned by a local family from Soufrière. I won't tell you their names, but if you go into your quick research, you'll know who owns it. Okay? And for many years, they went from ministry to ministry to want to develop the site. And they were told it was part of a no-build zone, and they were not going to be given permission to sell it, to develop it. They eventually agreed to sell it as a housing, a location for a residence. And the person who bought it paid, I think, $8.5 million US for the site. And that was in 2013, 2014. And the then government not only gave the person the alien landlord's license to buy it, but also gave them what's called approved development status, meaning that they would allow the property to be developed. Okay? And so it was on the basis of those two agreements that the person purchased the land. We then came into government in 2016, faced with now the complication where the person had been given an alien landlord's license and had been given development status. And he made an application to build a pretty elaborate house. I think it was over 11,000 square feet of a house. And the DCA said, no, you can only build a house within the existing footprint of the house that existed, of which he then agreed to do. This property became a political football on two occasions. One, when the same Richard Frederick, in opposition, went and marched and stormed the property with the media, claiming that they were illegally building on the property, not recognizing that it was the government he is part of now that actually gave the persons the initial permission to proceed. Okay? The second issue that has existed, and it's a vexing issue, is that some people start their piton climb from that beach. So a boat brings them to the beach, they're met at the beach, and then they start going up through Fongelib to the trail. And there was a period of time in which the people were prevented from doing that. And there was a huge fight, if I'm not mistaken, between the owner of the land and the Soufrière Development Foundation, who had agreed to fix up the path. Because from an insurance liability perspective, the person who owned the land was concerned as to how treacherous the access was, and if anything happened, who would be liable. My understanding is that the Soufrière Foundation has now met with the owner and resolved the issue, but they have personally selected who those guides are going to be and have circumvented or passed the persons who traditionally do the climbs from that location. And so it remains a controversy. So the developer has done nothing wrong. Whatever he has done has been facilitated by successive governments, but it goes back to the beginning, I would say to you, that, and when I spoke to Prince Charles, and Prince Charles said the same thing, it's going to be impossible for the government to purchase all of the land, and that you have to implement a very pragmatic and realistic development plan. So as long as you're not scarring, interfering with the beauty of the pitons. Now, everybody is always very quick to go and say, oh, we're going to lose the World Heritage Site. I know of no such actions that are currently on the table for us to lose the World Heritage Site. And I'm disappointed that we have not understood the practicality of the PMA. What should happen is anybody who's going to develop within the PMA gets planning approval first from the PMA. And then once they've gotten the planning approval from the PMA, that they can move on to the DCA. And we've not done a good enough job of developing those rules sufficiently within the PMA. It's almost like if the DCA has been acting as a PMA and trying to create special conditions for that area, because there was another house that was being built in that area which was much bigger. But again, because it was in the basin of the PMA, but was not on the PMA site. So what's the name of the place that Colin Tennant used to own? Right next to the Sugar Beach. There's a housing development area that Colin Tennant used to have. All those lots are outside of the PMA area as well. So again, we need to do a better job of understanding the history of what has transpired. I feel very sorry because this government seems to be making it a habit of whenever we have any foreign direct investment in this country, that they feel like they're fair game to go after. And it's very difficult for them to defend themselves. So whether it's Cabot, whether it's DSH, whether it's Ritz-Carlton, it doesn't really matter, whether it's Sandals. The political party that continuously plays politics with these investors is them. And I think it's wrong. And I'm really hoping that civil society at some point is going to rise up to their responsibility to defend what's right in this country and to defend the rule of law in this country. Any other questions? Thank you very much. So Tuesday, I'm going to be assembling here from 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm hoping that we're going to have the next Parliament. As soon as we know the next Parliament, I'll let everybody know. But on that day of Parliament, I'm going to start my walk to Parliament. I call it my March of Democracy from here, and I'm hoping that many solutions will come and join us, because sadly, this government will not respond. So even when we take them to court and we're victorious in court, they find every single way not to accept that, and they return back to that same pattern of behavior. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you.